Hey everyone, thanks for watching this mini lecture. Today we're going to be talking about analysis, which is a key skill that you're going to be using throughout this class and really throughout your life. I've tried to talk about analysis in a way that will simplify it, but the best way to get the hang of it is to start practicing, which is exactly what you'll be doing with this week's discussion board post. So let's get right into it.
English 101 online with Josh. The time to learn is now.
So let's talk about analysis. And we're going to start, maybe, in a different place than you might have expected. Because I want to start with the European alchemists of the Renaissance, and a Latin phrase that they used to describe their own method of investigation. One of the maxims that the alchemists held was solve a coagula. And it's a great way to think about how to analyze anything. Whether, like them, you're trying to turn lead into gold, or maybe you're just trying to understand what the story you're reading is really about. Solve a coagula. To dissolve and then coagulate, or to put it into more modern terms, to take it apart and then put it back together again. This is really the process of analysis. So, whether it be scientific analysis, data analysis, psychoanalysis, rhetorical analysis, or literary analysis, it's all really the same basic process of asking how the smallest details work together to form the big picture. So, in the case of analytical reading, the idea is that you take a text apart and ask questions about its elements. These questions tend to be open-ended and usually start with why and how. The insights gained from asking these questions can then allow you to put the reading back together in a new way, coagula, and in doing so, come to a deeper understanding, one that you wouldn't have been able to come to if you weren't just trying to look with a bird's eye view. To put it simply, in analysis, we always start with the small details, and we put those details together in a meaningful way to come up with a new and more profound way of understanding an essay or a novel, or a poem, or a music video, or a video game, or really anything that tells a story or argues an idea. In How to Read Like a Writer, Mike Bunn asks us to think about all the little minute choices that a writer must make when composing. In Bunn's view, a piece of writing is the sum total of all the choices, both big and small, that an author made along the way. So one cool way to read is to take the time to try to retrace the writer's steps and then analyze those choices. And just like you can better understand the nature of matter by breaking it down into molecules and atoms, and finally subatomic particles, and just as you can better understand a meal by breaking it down into its recipe ingredients, and just as you can better understand a computer by taking it apart and attempting to put it back together again, you can better understand both your own writing and the writing of others through this process of analysis. Solve a coagula. But how do you know what elements are important? Well, there are 3 strategies that I like to use and that I think will serve you well in this class. The first is to seek out the weird or otherwise surprising elements of a text. Look for where the author zigged when you were expecting her to zag. Find those moments and ask how that choice contributes to the overall meaning. Sometimes the oddest choices are the most significant ones. And so, with a story like Red Dirt Witch, you might find yourself asking, well, why address the racial history of America through a fantasy story? And why make the protagonist a witch? Doesn't that seem a little out of the ordinary? And this line of inquiry could lead you nowhere. And in that case, you'd open the book back up again and keep looking. But it could unlock a dimension to the story that changes the way you look at it forever. And you really can't know until you start writing. So that's the first way. Look for the weird. The second strategy is to look out for contradictions. You might have been taught to think of contradictions in a piece of writing as a bad thing. But sometimes the tension between opposites is where the juiciest bits of meaning exist. This is also true in life and in love, but let's not go there. So, what contradictions seem to exist in Red Dirt Witch? Well, you might think about the tension between the dark vision that Emmeline sees of a violent future of racial oppression versus the vision of resistance and triumph that Pauline helped her to see. And as you all well know, both of these futures are true in their own way. And yet, what can the tension between them, brought out through the contradictions in the scene, tell us? I don't know the answer. You tell me. And if you have any good ideas on this one, put it in the Teams chat for extra credit. So that's the second strategy. Look for contradictions. The third and final strategy that we'll talk about today is to look for patterns, repetitions, the same idea coming around again and again in different forms. In Red Dirt Witch, you may ask yourself about the recurring use of plants and the relationship to the land that appears again and again in the story. I mean, heck, it's in the very title, Red Dirt Witch. But you might also notice the recurrence of the theme of sacrifice in various guises throughout the story. Or maybe instead your eyes are drawn to the repetition of the farmer's market image and the idea of greed at the beginning and then again at the end of the story. And you might think to yourself, well, it wouldn't have showed up so many times if it wasn't significant. So what does an analyst do? You just pick a thread and you start weaving. These are just 3 ways of finding significance. But the biggest piece of advice I would give you is just to trust your gut. If something stands out to you and it catches your curiosity, there's a good chance if you follow it down the line, you might find something. Of course, be prepared to throw out dead ends, but go with your intuition and who knows what you might find. The more you practice this skill, the more attentive of a reader you'll become. You learn to key into details that others may have glanced over, and by asking why those details were included and how they impact the overall meaning, you discover a whole new dimension to reading and indeed thinking. Through practicing analysis, you go beyond regurgitating someone else's idea, their story, and you enter into a creative act where you aren't just summarizing a story to prove to some weirdo professor that you did the busy work. No, instead, you're working hand in hand with the author to develop something new, something yet unimagined, but perhaps vital, both for your own understanding and for the understanding of others. Thanks for listening, and looking forward to seeing you all again at our next meeting.